All right, we are here on a continued hearing for CUP 0012-24 communication towers. At this time, we'll call for conflict of interest by the commissioners. Commissioner Williams has no conflicts.
Coffee has no conflicts.
Commissioner Corn has no conflicts.
All right, and with that, we'll turn it over to Assistant Director Alex.
Thank you, Commissioners, Alex Fan, planning staff. So today we're going to hear file CUP 0012-24 for a proposal for a communication tower. The applicant is requesting to construct and operate a 125-foot self-supporting tower with communication equipment and support ground equipment for a final above ground level of 135 feet. The tower is proposed to be housed in a 50-foot by 50-foot fenced area. The proposed site is located in Old Town, Idaho. The parcel contains approximately 9.8 acres and is currently zoned Rural 5. Communication towers are conditionally permitted in the Rural 5 zone. This is the site plan that was provided by the applicant. I apologize for the layout of that, but it should be better in your staff report. So these are the applicable standards at which this application was reviewed against. So this is an unplatted parcel, approximately 9.794 acres in size. It's zoned Rural 5 and has a land use designation of rural residential. And the property is accessed from Highway 41, a state of Idaho owned and maintained public right. On the right-hand side of the screen, highlighted in blue, is the subject parcel. And just directly to the east is Highway 41. So the site contains minimal slopes of 15% grade or less. The site does not contain mapped wetlands. It does not contain any frontage on a river, stream, or lake. It is located within Special Flood Hazard Area X and does not have any critical wildlife habitat as identified by any local, state, or federal agencies. The proposed communication tower is not required to be serviced by a water system, but the site does have an individual well. Same with any sewage disposal, but the site is served by an individual septic system. It's served by Spirit Lake Fire District, Inland Power, and West Bonner School District number 83. So this is a screenshot of the public use table showing communication towers. Communication towers are conditionally permitted in the rural zone, subject to note 3, which we'll go over now. So note 3 is where access to the site is by road. The road shall be located within a recorded easement or public right-of-way and constructed to the appropriate standards set forth in Title 2 of this code or Appendix A of this title, except where subject to the terms of an approved special use permit issued by a state or federal agency. For the applicant, the project site is accessed via Highway 41, the state of Idaho owned and maintained public right-of-way. The applicant provided an encroachment permit for a shared driveway between the project site and the parcel to the north. Idaho Transportation Department was notified of this project and provided a comment on the status of the encroachment permit, stating that it is permitted as a joint encroachment with the subject parcel and their neighbor to the north. It should be noted that it appears that the encroachment permit is located on the northern property. The applicant has provided a site plan showing that a portion of the driveway is on their property. However, there appears to be no documentation provided by the applicant that their property is subject to an easement from the northern property. Staff has reached out to Idaho Transportation Department to determine the ownership of the approach and received no response. The applicant shall provide a recorded easement document granting them access over the property to the north, or alternatively, the applicant shall be granted a separate encroachment permit off Highway 41 from the Idaho Transportation Department that would allow access to the project site. So these are the standards for communication towers. Standard A is communication towers and attendant facilities shall be enclosed by a fence not less than 6 feet in height. The applicant stated that the proposed tower and the ancillary equipment will be enclosed within a 6-foot fenced compound, as shown in the zoning drawings submitted with this application. That should be included in your staff report. If not, it should be included in the packet altogether. Staff has stated that the applicant's proposal meets the requirement for a 6-foot high fence with additional privacy and security measures. Letter B, the base of any tower shall not be closer to any property line than distance equal to the tower height. The base of the proposed tower location will exceed the 1 foot to 1 foot setback requirement set forth by Bonner County. For the site plan provided, the 135-foot proposed tower will be set back from the northern property line 183.77 feet, the western property line 277.5 feet, the southern property line 147.92 feet, and the eastern property line 1010.74 feet. All proposed setbacks exceed this requirement. The applicant must adhere to the site plan provided if approved. Letter C, the hearing body shall consider the public convenience and necessity of the communication tower and any adverse effect facility would have on properties in the vicinity and may require such reasonable restrictions and conditions of development as to uphold the purpose and intent of this title and the comprehensive plan. The applicant stated the convenience and necessity of the proposed tower facility is outlined thoroughly within this application and supporting documents to include the health and safety benefits of the same. The proposed tower facility will have no adverse effect on the properties in the vicinity. Staff stated communication towers are conditionally permitted in all zoning districts in Bonner County. The proposed wireless facility is intended to enhance service reliability within the coverage area, including access to emergency services and 911. The applicant has provided additional details in their compliance and safety narrative. However, staff has received conflicting evidence from the applicant and the appellant regarding whether the communication tower would have adverse effects on surrounding properties. Letter D, communication towers shall be built to Telecommunication Industry Association and Electronic Industry Association 222 revision F standards or as amended for a steel antenna support structures. The applicant stated that this tower will be built to these standards. And staff stated that at the time of building location permit, the Bonner County Planning Department shall require plans that meet specifications of that standard or as amended for steel antenna structures. Letter E, communication towers shall be constructed to accommodate other future communication services where technically feasible, otherwise known as co-location. The applicant stated that the proposed tower shall be constructed for co-location so as to accommodate at least 2 additional carriers antenna arrays without the need for structural upgrades, as shown in the zoning drawing submitted with this application. Staff stated that it appears that the plans submitted by the applicant accommodate co-location for future communication services. Letter F, communication towers shall meet all operational, construction, and lighting standards of the Federal Aviation Administration. The applicant stated that the proposed tower shall be in full compliance with all rules and regulations and standards set by the Federal Aviation Administration and all other federal, state, and local governmental agencies. Excuse me. Staff stated the proposed tower shall meet all FAA required operational, construction, and lighting standards, and an FAA no hazard determination shall be provided by the applicant. Letter G, communication towers shall not penetrate any airspace surface on or adjacent to any public or private airfields as set forth at subchapter 5.2 of this title. The applicant stated that the proposed tower will not penetrate any airspace surface as set forth in subchapter 5.2 of this title. Staff stated an FAA no hazard determination is a requirement of the FAA to identify impacts of towers on aircraft and airports. As stated above, the FAA no hazard determination shall be provided prior to the issuance of this permit if approved. Letter H, upon termination of use of a communication tower for a period of not less than 1 year, the landowner and or tower operator or applicant shall remove the tower along with all supporting equipment, apparatus, and foundation. The applicant stated that Vertical Bridge LLC, DBA, the Towers LLC understands and will comply with this provision. And staff has added this as a proposed condition of approval. Letter I, flammable material storage shall be in accordance with International Fire Code standards. Applicant stated that the only flammable material that will be utilized at this facility is diesel fuel for the backup generator, which will be stored in accordance with International Fire Code standards. Staff stated the proposal to store flammable material in accordance with fire code standards and provide necessary documentation is adequate in the code. Letter J, communication towers shall not be used for signage, symbols, flags, banners, or other devices or objects attached to or painted or inscribed upon any communication facility for the purposes of displaying a message of any kind, except as required by a governmental agency. The applicant stated that no signage, symbols, flags, banners, or other devices or objects shall be attached to or painted or inscribed upon any portion of the proposed communication facility, except that which might be required by any federal, state, or local governmental agency. And staff added this as a condition of approval, as a proposed condition of approval. Now we get to the parking standards set forth in 12-4.3. There is no requirement of minimum off-street parking spaces for a communication tower in this subchapter. However, if required, the site has sufficient area to accommodate parking for the proposed use. Grading, stormwater, and erosion control. So this project is applicable to this, or this code section is applicable to this project under 12-720.2C. All public projects, including road construction undertaken by Bonner County or undertaken by any other political subdivision of the state of Idaho or public agency over which Bonner County asserts jurisdiction through this title and Title 11 of this code as amended. Staff stated that a grading, stormwater management, and erosion control plan may be required at the time of building location permit is submitted pursuant to this subchapter. The reason that this falls under the subchapter is that it is the communication tower is listed under the public use table and will be considered a public. So a full list of the agencies notified of this file can be found in Appendix A of the staff report. And the following agencies provided comment. So we received 2 comments from Idaho Transportation Department, which is included in your file today. And we received no comment reply from Idaho Department of Environmental Quality. We received 1 from the Idaho Transportation Department on January 3rd, but they have since updated their comments. And Kootenai-Pond Sewer District and Spirit Lake Fire District. All the other agencies that were notified did not. And we have received public comments on this file, which are included in your packet today. So these are the proposed conditions to be met prior to issuance of the file. Condition B1 would be an FAA no hazard determination shall be provided to the planning department. And B2, a recorded easement granted to the applicant over the northern property that shares the approved approach from Idaho Transportation Department shall be provided. Alternatively, a new encroachment and access shall be permitted by the Idaho Transportation Department. That concludes my presentation. I can answer any questions if you have any for me.
Does the board have any questions for staff at this time? Commissioner Corn.
So looking at that map, the easement that exists right now, is that on a property line?
From in this map, it shows it on the property line. From the encroachment permit provided from ITD, it shows that it straddles the property line on both sides.
And there's a discrepancy, it looks like, in the paperwork that they may or may not have deeded access.
That's correct.
Okay, but they're saying if that's an issue, then they can create a new access on that strip of property there that we're looking at.
If the access would have to be approved by the Idaho Transportation Department as a separate access, not using this joint access that was permitted several years ago.
Okay. That's all I have, thanks.
All right, this time we'll turn it over to the applicant. Oh, I forgot. Does anybody need accommodations or we're cut past that one? No, thank you.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, can you hear me okay?
Mhm.
Great. My name is Josh Leonard with the law firm Clark Wardle. We're in Boise at PO Box 639, zip is 83701. With me today, I have Stephen Kennedy, the applicant's radio frequency expert, as well as Andy Hambright, the project manager, and the property owner, Robert Custer is here as well. Staff did a great job of describing the project, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. I'm going to click through those slides pretty quickly. Commissioner Korn, in response to the question that you asked staff, and we'll get into it a little bit deeper, there are actually a couple of different options for access there. Three that we can count. So, but we'll get into that a little bit later too. Okay. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these slides. We'll go through them pretty quickly. Staff's already covered them. Location map, project overview. Key point here, I think, would be that fourth bullet point, and the fifth bullet point, the tower and equipment will be painted to match and blend with the surrounding landscape, and that the landscaping, it will have landscaping around the base as required by Bonner County Code. The little turquoise square indicates the approximate location of the site on the aerial and on the property, as you can see. And this is a zoomed in version of what staff showed you a few moments ago in terms of where we propose that access to be. And this is one of those two options that we'll discuss a little bit later. Zoomed in here just to show you the setbacks that we do, as mentioned by staff, exceed those setbacks. We're compliant with county code. We also have this slide that shows them the approximate, I think this is rounded to foot, setbacks from each of the property lines that are close. Compound, the green shows the fence around the outside of the compound. The orange circle shows the tower itself. And then what's called an elevation of the subject property. This one's important just because it shows Verizon as the top co-location and an anchor tenant, and then with additional spaces for two further wireless companies to put antennas. I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Kennedy now to go through the need case for the proposed tower.
Afternoon, Madam Chair, Commissioners. My name is Steve Kennedy. I'm a radio frequency design engineer. I have 35 years of experience designing wireless networks. So I was hired to come in and look at this from various points of view. So I geek out on this stuff. So I know it probably glazes other people's eyes over. So I'm gonna try to go fast. So if I'm moving too fast or glazing eyes over, or you have a question, please ask. This is a capacity cell split. Capacity. Two reasons why carriers build sites. One is coverage. Coverage is the ability for the phone, the transceiver and the phone to talk to the transceiver and the tower and have coverage or not have dropped calls, have the signal present. The other is capacity. Capacity is the ability to provide throughput. Now, when I started this business 35 years ago, all you could do on a phone was talk. Now we do a lot more things on the phone. We have streaming, we have web surfing, we have email, apps, all sorts of fun stuff. This creates the need for capacity or bandwidth. An everyday analysis or analogy of capacity is, let's say you put a water pipe down the street. One person taps that water pipe, they get 100% capacity for all the water. The second person taps the same pipe, capacity split 50-50. Two more people tap it, everybody gets 25%. If you think of a radio channel as kind of like a water pipe, there's water going, but the more users within the area, the less water per user is happening, or the less bandwidth. Well, when we were talking on cell phones, it didn't require a lot of bandwidth. Now, when we're streaming and doing all sorts of other things, it requires a lot more bandwidth. Objective new sites capacity. There's low throughput in the area for the customer, and offload the capacity sites and the capacity impacted sites are to the north and to the northwest. Provide coverage along 41 and in the rural area surrounding the highway. 96% of Americans use a cell phone, 57% of American homes have exclusively cell phones, and 84% of 911 calls are made from cell phones. Proposed site, you go to take that. Once again, why here? Lack of coverage along the highway, lack of indoor services, a significant amount of increased network use in suburban and rural areas. Like this is the proposed site. This is the existing Verizon sites that surround the proposed. So the closest site being 3.6 miles away, the farthest site being 12.44 miles away.
Mr. Kennedy,
Yes,
what would the proximity be of other carriage towers?
I will have that in a few slides.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. So this is Cell Mapper, third-party crowdsourced data. Anytime you see dark green, orange, or red, that's a lower signal level quality, which is not able to make as good a coverage level. I'll explain the coverage levels in a second. But this is just third-party data, crowdsourced data showing that coverage in this area is bad for Verizon's customers.
Can I ask you a question, please?
Yes, ma'am.
You have the date on this presentation as 2024. Is this updated data? Did you update the data when you're looking at the coverage?
No.
Okay, thank you.
This is Ookla data. This is another third-party crowdsourced data. It's a little harder to see, but there's a lot of red and orange, which is below outdoor signal level within the area. And these are actually the subscribers' mobiles reporting back to the network. This is what I'm seeing. So this is Verizon Open Signal. Once again, same thing. We're getting a mix. We're getting some good, some bad. And if you can look up to the northwest, you see a whole lot of bad, and that has impact in what we've got going on. So coverage, 3 types of coverage. Indoor. So that is to a 95% probability that a site at providing that level of service can provide service indoors because of walls, bricks, cement blocks, variety of other things that impedes radio frequencies passing through. In vehicle, all right, it's a steel box or a plastic box, depending on these days, and it's surrounded by glass, so you don't have to have a strong signal level to provide in vehicle. And then outdoors on the street, you're in your front yard working on your lawn, you don't need as much there. So those are the signal levels. So I give them red, yellow, and green. Green being the best. So current coverage by the propagation modeling system, which takes into account math, a lot of math, does terrain, clutter, what type of things are in the area, and shows you what kind of coverage. This is low band. This is in 700 megahertz. The propagation model saying it's scratchy. Not a lot of in vehicle and not a lot of indoor, but outdoor and on street. If we look at what the proposed site's going to bring in, it's going to bring in a lot of coverage within that area that's showing a lack of coverage, and it's going to be able to offload that site to the north and the one to the west. This is mid-band coverage.
Yes, Andy, I'm sorry, just another clarifying question. When you refer to coverage, are you referring to specifically Verizon network coverage, or are you referring to all types of coverage, all networks, all towers?
Once again, I'm referring to Verizon right now. I will get into the other carriers as I complete my task on Verizon. So I will answer your question, sir. This is mid-band, so this is a higher frequency band. Mid-bands, they don't traverse as far, they don't penetrate buildings as well, they don't provide as much of a level of service. But the good thing about mid-band is they provide a much larger water pipe. They have a whole lot more capacity. And bandwidth and low band, 10 megahertz wide spectrum. You get into the mid-band, you're getting up to 30, 40 megahertz width of spectrum. And this is what the site's going to be doing on the mid-band side with the proposed model. So, and this is going to answer your question, Commissioner, that we're going to get into some specifics. So this is a scanner drive test report I did back in August of 2024. So I took a industry standard radio equipment, and I did get it stamped and sealed by an Idaho engineer. So he reviewed all my data and concurred with me. So what I do is I take a industry standard scanner, piece of test gear that it's called a PCTEL G-Flex scanner. Carriers use it, independents use it. It's pretty standard. I took that as well as a Wilson Pro cellular network scanner. And what I did was I drove around in the area and I took readings for all of the frequency bands that AT&T, T-Mobile, and Verizon have in the area. The scanner processes signals from all of those in really, really heavy detail. I drew the drive route based on the primary coverage objective for the site as well as the propagation proposed. So I did a blind scan. So I said, hey, I want you to scan all bands, see what's out there, find out what bands the carriers have and they're actively using at that point in time. So we came back with 700 megahertz, 2100 megahertz, and 3800 megahertz in the high band. This is the drive test route. That's the route I took when I drove. This is the distance once again to the Verizon neighbor sites. So here's the Verizon overview. We can see that we've got some marginal service, low to no service, as well as outdoor service only. We do have some in building to the north. We have some in vehicle, kind of in and around proposed, but not close to it. And once again, we can see that to the west, we're not getting much coverage, as well as in the area around the proposed and towards the south. Once again, this is low band. Here's the mid band. It gets even worse. So we have a whole lot more marginal or blue and a whole lot more low to no service, which is magenta. Even though my scanner was able to decode that packet of data, the amount of energy it takes to, and the amount of what it takes to complete the connection for the phone and be able to transfer data, it requires more than what's down in the magenta level. This is the high frequency band, 3700 megahertz. So we can see the only site active in the area that has high frequency band at this time is up to the north in Old Town. This is Verizon data zoom. You can see a whole lot of outdoor, some in vehicle, and marginal.
Can I ask you, when you're talking about high frequency band, is that considered the 5G?
Yes. So within the 3800 megahertz channels are the C band that was auctioned off 4 or 5 years ago. And those the carriers are bringing in, they're bringing in the 5G technology. So zooms. So we can see the difference. We go from low band to mid band. We can see a significant change in coverage. Now, 90% of the spectrum the carriers use are in the mid band. So we're already, kind of at a bad scene going on in the area on the mid band. This is the high band. We can see that there's very little service. It's not going to propagate as far. Conclusion is the scanner reported all frequency bands for AT&T, T-Mobile, and Verizon in the area. Area shows a significant gap in service of approximately 3 miles along Highway 41, as well as the rural area around the proposed. Low, mid, and high band do not provide acceptable quality coverage for any of the areas. Let's see. Did you cut out the AT&T and T-Mobile drive data from that? Awesome.
Right. Mr. Kennedy, could you please define what you consider acceptable coverage?
Okay, once again, it depends upon the area you're in. If you're indoors, you need at least a neg 85 dBm, that green color. If you're out, if you're in your car,
you
you
need
need
to back up. How is that standard determined?
by the radio's ability to process the information and make the call happen.
What agency or entity determines that standard?
We are licensed by the FCC, so they have determinations. There's been a lot of back and forth over the years about it, but as the technology has changed from analog when we were low throughput, right, the coverage area of the site was higher. As we've increased technology and need more bandwidth at cell edge, quality of the sites have shrunk. The last time I saw anything from the FCC that talked about quality level of service, you need at least a neg 106. And that was based on the broadband coverage maps where people were applying for money, for stimulus money. And neg 106 was the minimum amount of coverage needed to provide service. And once again, neg 106, that's outdoors. Come into a house or in a vehicle, things play. Hence the neg 85, neg 95, and neg 106, green, yellow, red.
Thank you. I'm just trying to understand, especially when we qualify a conversation in a rural area, what a reasonable expectation is for levels of service.
I would say a reasonable expectation in rural areas, if I'm indoors, I should be able to make a call or do whatever I want to on the phone. If I'm in a vehicle, I should be able to keep the phone call up. And if I'm outdoors, I should be able to do the same. That's a reasonable expectation of service.
That's whatever I want to on the phone in a rural area is a reasonable expectation of service.
The FCC, when they allocated these licenses, they allocated them based on either signal level within a geographic area or population covered. So we are required, or carriers are required by law to provide service level to all users in the United States.
Can I ask you what 5G ultra wideband is? Because when I look at Verizon's website to look at their coverage, they actually saturate this area with 5G ultra, what they call wideband, and the color of dark red is all over in that area, and it doesn't line up with the maps that you're showing in terms of coverage. So what is, and it's using a different term. So when I look at Verizon's map, it shows a saturation of 5G ultra coverage in the area that you're saying reports a problem with coverage.
Yes.
How does their, and in part, this particular map is up for today's date, it's up to date.
Yes.
Why does their map show saturated coverage, but your map shows there's a problem with coverage in that area?
Very good question. If you look at the low side of the map, you're going to see a word called disclaimer. As we all know, lawyers like to make all sorts of disclaimers when you come into it. And I have to move my glasses so I can read this. So the map disclaimer, if you click on that, it brings up this.
Well, everybody's gonna, so should you equally then have a disclaimer on your map? So which map is right? Because Verizon is testing their area and they're giving the map of coverage so that if I want to choose my carrier, they're telling me if I'm in this area, I have the highest availability of coverage. And isn't it reasonable that they would have done a test so that they can confirm? Because they have areas where they're saying there is coverage, then they have areas on the same map that go towards like Overlook Drive, where they're saying it moved from 5G Ultra to 4G Lite. And so it looks like they're gauging the coverage map. And the part where you're saying the tower needs is landing in an area that's saturated. And the reason the question comes up is when you look at the community comments, they're saying, how is there a need? And so when I look at the map on Verizon, and that's just Verizon, there's other carriers, but you've mentioned Verizon a few times, and the map doesn't match up. And so you're saying the disclaimer means there's no coverage? Or
my scanners, when I went out and drove, this is the ultra high band, wideband you're talking about. As you can see up at the top of that screen, it shows low to no service at 120 dBm. So if I can go back to the disclaimer, please let me state this. This map is not a guarantee of coverage, contains areas of no service, and may not reflect actual customer performance. Actual coverage may vary. So I'm very familiar with how Verizon does their propagation modeling. They use what's called operational path loss. Now, the same thing for AT&T, they use operational path loss. Whenever T-Mobile does their coverage maps, they actually use RSRP, which is the standard by which that scanner looked at the system and came up with, hey, here's what I see. So all I can tell you is, do I agree with the online maps? No, ma'am, I do not. And that's 35 years of experience telling you, I do not agree with the online maps from any of the carriers. I think they're too hopeful, to be really honest with you. What I believe in is I drove out there with a $100,000 piece of test gear, and I drove that area, and I spent a lot of time out there, and I'm telling you, you're lacking coverage. So I point to those online maps. Is everything on the internet true? No, it's not. Could Verizon's maps be better? Yes, ma'am, they could. But that disclaimer tells you this map is not a guarantee of coverage.
Are you any further questions for?
All right. Okay. So it's the same thing that we have with the disclaimer. For AT&T does the same thing. Average coverage may differ from that practice. It may be affected by terrain, weather, network changes, foliage, buildings, construction, signal strength, high usage periods, customer equipment, and other factors. That's off AT&T's website, their disclaimer. This is T-Mobile's disclaimer. Map approximates anticipated coverage outdoors, including 600 megahertz, based on a variety of factors, which may include limited or no coverage areas and does not guarantee service or availability. Move on and we'll look at alternative sites. So I looked at alternate sites in the area that was brought up by my customer saying, hey, look and evaluate these, make sure we're doing things right. So I did an alternate analysis. I'm gonna come up with this one. Okay, so alternate site analysis, we look at where the carrier search ring is. Where did the Verizon engineer say, I need a site, and the reasons why were capacity or coverage or whatever, based upon what we did in the first part of the deck. They look at where they need service. Can they co-locate on any existing sites? A zoning zone for a tower? If not, can it be? What are the dimensional standards, setbacks, etc.? Are there any CC&Rs that restrict? What are the practical concerns, grade, power, existing improvements, water access? And then the biggest, most important part, a willing landowner to be the landlord. That is by far the biggest impact on word of site, because you have to find a willing landowner. I reviewed existing towers in the area around the proposed, reviewed them for co-location potential to cover the same area as the proposed, and did an impact analysis. Once again, the proposed site. Now, AT&T sites. AT&T site has one 3.60 miles away is the closest, the farthest being 7.88, and AT&T actually has a site to the southeast. It's 4.7 miles away, where Verizon's was approximately 6 miles away. So that's AT&T in the area. And we look at T-Mobile. T-Mobile is actually co-located on the same site to the southeast, and the same sites in the other area. 5.91, 3.60, and 12.40 being the farthest side away. Once again, the Verizon sites, we've got 3.6, 12.44, 7.89 to the south. These are the alternate sites I reviewed. The various 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4 sites. And I looked at those and I did the alternate analysis. So one was a Corps of Engineers tower, one was an SBA tower, Day Wireless, and KJ on Y. They were all, various distances away from the existing Verizon proposed site. Alternate towers will not provide the same level of service proposed. The Day Wireless site is next to an existing AT&T site that provides no service around the proposed. The KMJY tower is in the FCC database, but it is too close to the Newport area. Both SBA and Corps of Engineers towers are along Highway 2, close to the neighbor Verizon sites, are not going to provide anything. So I recommend approval of proposed.
Mr. Kennedy, could you go back, please?
Yes, sir.
Your first bullet, the next slide.
Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me. That one.
Sorry, I can't read the slide anymore. Thank you. Alternate towers in the area will not provide the same level of service as proposed. Understand that statement. Would it be an acceptable level of service as compared to the same level of service?
No, sir, they would not.
Do you have that analysis?
Yes, sir. It's part of the original filing package where all the information came in your package.
Thanks.
Yes, sir. Just me in a position to go.
I can do this in the next one. Go back in for the candidate examination. And about 2 slides is all. As Mr. Kennedy mentioned, no existing towers enable Verizon or the other carriers for that matter to provide coverage to the targeted service area. And the reason for that is residential growth, increased highway traffic. That just increases the demand for reliable wireless service. Putting a cell tower far away from its service area doesn't make sense. That's a key point of our presentation because putting a cell tower away from its service area just means that 2 towers are required instead of 1. Madam Chair, if I can go back to your question about the online service maps as well, just really briefly, all 3 of those disclaimers make the point that that level of service that's on the screen that's shown is an outdoor level of service, which is the lowest level of service that's available. And so while their advertising folks are putting up a map that's technically true, it doesn't show where their acceptable levels of service are, just their outdoor levels of service. I wanted to jump up and mention this before Mr. Kennedy continues with his candidate analysis. I wanted to talk a little bit about the process, and the first thing I'd note is that after determining that they have a significant gap in coverage, the Verizon engineers then look to see if there are any other towers in the area in which they can put antennas to get coverage, acceptable coverage. Having not found that here, they then draw a circle. It's called a search ring, wherein they would need to place a tower in order to get acceptable service. Then they hire what's called a site acquisition contractor to go out and contact owners within that area. The site acquisition contractor is looking for a piece of property that's large enough that the setbacks can be met. And also the key is finding a piece of property that the owner is willing to lease a 50 by 50 foot square to the tower company for a cell tower. The names that you see up here are the landowners who responded to the site acquisition contractor's initial inquiries into whether or not they would be able to put a 50 by, or would be able to lease a 50 by 50 foot space. Ultimately, though, only three landowners were willing to lease land for a tower, and of those three, Verizon's radio frequency experts conclusively determined that green pin right there, which is the proposed site, is the only one that would provide the acceptable level of coverage throughout this search ring. Mr. Kennedy is going to discuss each of those three that were willing to lease land for this tower and why the other two were ruled out.
Okay, so I did an alternate analysis using the propagation modeling system and looked at the capacity of the area and speaking with the Verizon arc engineer, and this is what my results were, my analyzation. With request to review and propose the two alternate candidates. Like Josh said, there was three that were willing. This was proposed and the other two. So this capacity site, so not only coverage, but capacity had to come into play as well, because this site has to offload the overcapacity sites/sectors. So I had to take that into account in the analysis as well. Primary objective is to provide capacity offload to neighbor sites to the north and bridge coverage to the south. So here's the green pin in the upper corner. That's the proposed. The other two sites that were alternates were the Melisa property and the Unique property. 1.32 miles away and 1.6 miles away from the proposed. Once again, there's the tower. For capacity offload, proposed site must be able to provide enough service level and coverage for the site and sector it's trying to offload. So, you want to take capacity away from an existing site, offload, make it reduced. You have to make sure that the new site covers enough into the existing site to offload that capacity. Allows for lower power output per mobile, higher customer level, higher throughput level, cell edge, and better customer experience. The offload the overload sectors provides increased bandwidth capacity in the area where it's being offloaded, and it also provides for better coverage indoors and in vehicle. Alternate one, Melisa property was a 120-foot tower. Option two is a Unique property, 120-foot tower. This was the focus zone. So in that propagation model, I told the model, hey, within this green block, I want you to do some extra math for me, and I want you to really pay attention to some particular things and come back and tell me what you see. So it went off and did all its math, and this is what it came up with. So this is low band, proposed versus existing. Upper left is the proposed site. The lower right is the existing level of service based on the propagation model. So we're showing that with in-vehicle, at least in-vehicle service, so in-vehicle and indoor, 31.32 square kilometers are covered with that level of service with the proposed, and within the existing, 3.48 square kilometers. So an 89%, there's 89% less coverage in the area by what's going on now versus what we're proposing. The next slide shows alternate one. Alternate one provides 23% reduction in coverage compared to proposed in low band. Alternate two provides 32% less coverage compared to proposed, and that's low band. We look at mid band. it's a different story. Remember, midband doesn't propagate as far. It's just not able to. So 97% reduction compared to existing. Existing is 97% worse than what we have what we would do with proposed. Alternate one, it's a 14% reduction in coverage compared to proposed. Alternate two is a 30% reduction in compared to coverage compared to proposed. So 90% of the spectrum are utilized by Verizon's mid-band and high band. So there's not as much low band. Alternate one and two do not provide the same level of offload. Remember, the offload was to the sectors to the north and the west. So if we're going back and we're looking at we look at the picture. So we're trying to offload to the north and west. And we've got two alternates that are farther south and east. So the proposed does a better job of offloading those sectors to the north and the west and providing the capacity fix that the Verizon engineer started this whole process with, was trying to resolve the situation.
So Mr. Kennedy, I'm confused. The need is primarily to the north and the west, but more than half of the engineer's search ring is to the southeast.
They put in a larger area to see what they find because you never know who's going to come back as willing landlords. So within a rural area, they put a half-mile ring and try to expand it and see what's going on. And because of the area is the way it is, he was trying to get something in the area, and he found that once SIDAC brought candidates back, and there was 3 willing, he looked at the 3 willing candidates, and the North candidate did the job.
Yeah, I'm still just confused about why the search area would have been so far southeast if the real need was northwest.
Well, this blue area is not the search area. That's my area where I said this is where you.
No, I understand. I'm looking at the search area from the prior slides.
Oh, okay.
There just seems to be a lack of correlation to me.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Part of the reason for that lack of correlation is that when they do a search ring, the initial search ring, it's scientific, but it's not identifying individual points within that search ring, which can vary based on topography. So that may be one of the reasons also why those southern ones, if they were maybe a little bit taller, might provide better, but they're also grouped nearer to more residences. And so it would probably be a higher burden for us to come in and get those approved for zoning. That's not why they ruled them out. They ruled them out based on whether or not the RF, the radio frequency coverage, is there.
And did the search include contacting property owners in the state of Washington? Since half the ring appears to be in the state of Washington.
I did contact property owners in the state.
Excuse me, sir, you have to state your name, please.
Sorry, my name's Andy Gambright. Was the site acquisition specialist that did the application and negotiated the leases. I did look in Washington. If you see there's an X on that is like the ideal, that's the center, that's the ideal spot that they want to be. And most of the time, if you get outside of there to the outsides of the ring, they end up denying the candidates anyway. I go through this all the time. You put in candidates that are, because a lot of times you can't find one that's in the center or close to the center. And so you end up redoing this over and over and over until you find something. Anything on the outside of those edges would not have worked. When I was told that specifically.
When you say they would decline that, you mean
the radio frequency engineer, Verizon's radio frequency engineer, who's reviewing this and meets the site.
Do me a favor then and go back to the slide that shows the engineer's rate circle and compared to the proposed site. I'm just struggling to see the consistency. It appears to be
so that red X,
quite a bit.
the red X, the center, that is the ideal area. That was where they would want to be. That's where their program said, hey, if you can get anything, it spits out a lot of latitude, a lot of longitudinal latitude point that says right here would be the ideal place at the height. It was actually the original search ring height. If you could get it right there, was I think 100 feet. They could have done it, or 120 20, it was a little bit less than what we're proposing now, because we had to go up a little bit to get the same coverage.
Okay, so then the center of the red circle next. Looks like it's approximately halfway between the proposed site and the existing AT&T site that sits on higher ground.
I think it's less than. I wish we had a scale in here.
I'm sure it's not exact. I mean, it's an asking that I'm just trying to understand again.
The topography does roll, and then also trees and other obstacles get in the way.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the topographic map and the lay of the land in that area. How much higher the ground is there. So that's part of what's confusing to me.
Thank you. If I may, and unless Commissioner Donkey, you have additional questions on that point.
Not at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. We get to where we were. The proposed or the application and the proposed site meet all county factors and criteria. Won't spend a lot of time on this just because staff has done a nice job in their presentation and in their staff report of identifying exactly how we comply with the various criteria. I'm going to apologize for this slide. We broke one of the cardinal rules of PowerPoints by cramming a lot of small language onto here. So I'm not going to go through these one by one. I think I learned my lesson yesterday during the board's public hearing on the rezone, where some of that text was so small I couldn't see it. But I apologize for this slide. But these are the factors for a tower, and we agree with staff in the staff report on that we do meet those various requirements, and that we had also noted staff's report was accepted and adopted by the hearing examiner as being correct. I also want to hit for a moment the Federal Communications Act of 1996. As noted in the staff report and in the hearing examiner's decision, our application and project do comply with the Bonner County requirements and comprehensive plan and zoning title. Even if we didn't comply, though, with the local requirements, we comply with the federal requirements, which requires approval of the wireless facility anyway.
I'm sorry, could you back up?
Sure.
So my understanding would be that would only be the case if our local requirements were inconsistent with the federal requirements. So could you please clarify what you mean by that? If I hear you correctly, you're essentially saying no matter what our local code says, that we're forced to approve it if you say that it complies with federal. Well, I don't understand that to be the case.
Sure. Well, not if we say it. I mean, obviously, us saying that it complies with federal, take that with a grain of salt. Where the applicant, it's up to you to determine that it would comply with the federal government's requirements for approval.
It's also my understanding that the federal government has carved out jurisdictions for the local agency to provide certain aspects of the approval, and you appear to be stating the opposite.
They're actually, I'm stating the same thing, but just in a different way. The federal government's, or the Federal Telecommunications Act of 1996, does carve out some local control. There are limits placed on that local control, and we're gonna get into that. If I can go through my the slides and discuss it in that order, and then at the end, if you have a further question, maybe we can address it then.
Yeah, that'd be great. So if you could be thinking of as you go through, if you believe any aspect of our county code is not compliant with the federal requirements, please point that out. Sure. Otherwise, I won't consider that statement to be accurate.
It's not that the county's code is in violation or violates. The county's code, as it reads now, is able to be met. And we believe we do meet the county's code. It's that if we believe that we've met the county's code and you disagree, you deny it, we have the opportunity to go to federal court, and we don't have to show that we complied with county code. We have to show that we complied with federal code when we go to federal court. That's
a different statement than the initial statement. So thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, I apologize for confusion. That's not that wasn't my intent. My intent was to say that if we end up in federal court, we have to show a different standard than what we showed to before that mission.
That makes sense, thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Sorry about that. The first slide here preserves local zoning authority, kind of. As I mentioned, it has some strong limits. I mentioned those a second ago. Prohibits the consideration of alleged and unproven health effects of RF emissions. I want to note this one here. It's important in this case because of the 17 public comments originally received, 11 of those impermissibly mentioned radio frequency emissions as a reason to deny the tower, and that can be considered. We'd also note, just while we're on the point of public comment, that of those 17 original written comments, 11 of them were from the appellants, the opponents in this case, and their friends and family members. And 7 of them are from people who don't live near the site, who live either outside the county or at least outside the immediate area of the site. Again, that next one down there, any denial must be supported by substantial evidence and a written record. That's one of the requirements of the Federal Telecommunications Act. Can't deny if denial would have the effect of prohibiting the provision of personal wireless services. That's what I mentioned a few minutes ago, if we were to be in federal court. And then the last one there, cannot discriminate between wireless carriers. And it's not the word discriminate there doesn't mean discrimination in the typical sense. It just means that it's not enough that one tower or the one cell company has coverage in the area. The other cell companies must be able to provide coverage in that area. Otherwise, they're technically being discriminated against and not given a fair opportunity to provide their service. This section is actually quoted from the federal law, and I highlighted the bolding and the underline is not in the federal law. I did that because I'm going to cover that back in just a second. This is the carve-out, Commissioner Domke, that you mentioned, except as provided in this paragraph. Nothing in this chapter shall limit or affect the authority of a state or local government or instrumentality thereof over decisions regarding the placement, construction, and modification of personal wireless service facilities. Then we get to the what is the except as provided in this paragraph. And this is again quoting from federal code. The regulation of the placement, construction, and modification of personal wireless service facilities by any state or local government or instrumentality thereof. First, there shall not discriminate, but the important one to cover today is shall not prohibit or have the effect of prohibiting the provision of personal wireless services. This is the one that, just really quickly, I wanted to also quote the one that talks about not using radio frequency emissions as a basis for denial. So the old federal standard, if we had gone to federal court and we're in federal court prior to 2018, we would have had to prove to the judge in that case that a significant gap in wireless service coverage and coverage exists, and also that the proposed site is the least intrusive means of filling that gap. The new federal standard is much more deferential to cell tower companies and not as deferential to local decisions. In this case, the wireless carrier Verizon has determined that it has a significant gap in coverage and needs to fill it. Also, it's determined that it needs to upgrade some of its facilities around the area, and that without the proposed site, Verizon's ability to provide wireless services is quote unquote materially inhibited. That quote materially inhibits is what the federal court would look for if a decision to deny a cell tower materially inhibits the carrier's ability to provide its personal wireless services. The opponents have raised a few objections. The first objection they raised was that that it would obscure their view or damage their view. Our response to this was that there's no right to a view in Idaho. Again, I'm not going to go through and read each of these. They're in our materials and in our supplementary narratives. But suffice to say that there is no right to a view in Idaho. And that's based on Idaho case law. The next basis for their objection is that it would have an effect on property values, or that it could affect the property values. On this point, all 3 of the studies that were cited to by the opponents and by the appellants were flawed. The first was the citation to a 2018 Alabama study. There was a citation to a study done in Australia, And there was a citation to a study that based its findings on fears of radio frequency emissions. Because it based its findings on fears of radio frequency emissions, which is prohibited under the Telecommunications Act, that study cannot be considered in making a decision on today's application. Even if these cited studies, though, even if they weren't flawed, mere citations to studies don't equate to substantial evidence that's sufficient to deny a cell tower application. The opponents can't just allege that the proposed cell tower will somehow reduce their property value. This first quote, negligible to no effect on home sales within the quarter-mile radius sphere of influence of cell towers. That comes from a 2018 study of 4 major markets. Those major markets, Boston, Dallas, Phoenix, and Raleigh, North Carolina. From those 4 studies, they determined in Boston that cell towers have no negative impact on property values. In Dallas, they have no measurable impact. In Phoenix, they have no measurable impact. And in Raleigh, they have, in one of those areas, no measurable impact, and overall, a 1% fluctuation both up and down based on the proximity of a cell tower. Now, none of these 4 cities are Old Town, Idaho, and none of these 4 cities are Bonner County. With that said, though, experts on the subject have found that a devaluation of residential real estate from proximal wireless sites does not show up in objective peer-reviewed studies. Nevertheless, a belief that wireless sites cause devaluation persists and is often raised as an objection during Planning Commission, City Council, County Board, and permit appeal hearings. That's an expert on the topic. This is our best evidence, though. Our best evidence is that, and this is the only evidence in the record that refers to a circumstance in the state of Idaho. It's an email response from the Ada County Chief Deputy Assessor to Ada County staff, in which he says, in regards to the impact on property values, I would take the same view I had a few years ago. While it becomes very emotional for owners when they're installed, the overall effect in the market is very minimal. In fact, we have not been able to find any measurable adjustment in the market. And that's again from the Ada County Chief Deputy Assessor in response to a question from staff on whether cell towers impact property values. Comprehensive plan. Another issue that's been raised by the opponents is that we somehow don't comply with the comprehensive plan. As an initial matter, the March 26th letter from the opponent's attorney mistakenly claimed that Idaho case Urusha or Uratia v. Blaine County applies only to uses by right, uses by right like subdivisions. That's incorrect. There are 2 subsequent cases that applied the Urusha case to CUP applications, and those cases are listed up there. Ultimately, the quote to be considered here is that the comprehensive plan is intended merely as a guideline whose primary use is in guiding zoning decisions. And that quote is in the context of it's the zoning code that controls, not the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan informs the zoning code. We're not in conflict with the comprehensive plan. We are actually in compliance with the comprehensive plan. And as noted in the staff report and in the hearing examiner's decision that adopted that staff report, we are not in conflict with the county's comprehensive plan. And we agree with the staff report and with the hearing examiner's decision. To access, and this, Commissioner Corn, this is to your point, and I wanted to address this in particular. The opponents have also tried to make a big deal about access or lack of access to the site. Like all city and county codes in the United States, Bonner County's code requires projects to have access to a public road. And the purpose for that, it's a pretty obvious purpose, is to ensure that the project isn't landlocked, that there's a way to get to it. Typically, properties have access to a public road, as in this case, because they're immediately adjacent to it. In this case, I believe it's Highway 41 that runs just along the eastern boundary of the property, and this property has a fair amount of frontage on that road. As you can see here, this is an image of the site in teal, and then the parcel in green. The applicant and the property owner, as I mentioned before, have several options as to how and where the subject parcel takes its access from Highway 41. This is option A. The opponents have correctly noted, though, that there isn't a written easement granting a right of access over this property. So there's not an express easement. That doesn't mean, though, that there's not a right to access. In fact, there almost certainly is a right of access based on a prescriptive easement, because these properties were in the same ownership and then split. The owner would have been inferred to have wanted the one to be able to access Highway 41 over this property. The problem with that is that to get recognition of a prescriptive easement, the applicant and the property owner would need to go to district court. So that's option A, going to district court, getting recognition of a prescriptive easement. This is option B. As you can see from option A, with the road on the parcel to the north, option B simply shifts that road to the south so that it's fully within, at least as regards this property, it's fully within the parcel. There are a couple of benefits to this. What this would require is simply going to the Idaho Transportation Department and obtaining not a new access permit, but a revised access permit that enlarges the point of access onto Highway 41, which is absolutely a ministerial, not a big deal, and would be easy to accomplish. This again is option B. So we have option A, which is north on the northern property, involves going to court. Option B, which is creating a new road with and amending the access permit. We also have option C, and option C, in this instance, we're lucky that the same property owner owns the subject parcel and the parcel immediately to the south. And so if we needed to, we have the ability to go to the Idaho Transportation Department and obtain an access permit for, over that property to provide access directly to the site in this instance. The bottom line, though, is that the property is not landlocked. It has access. It is, after all, immediately adjacent to a public highway. And as I mentioned in our written materials, the condition of approval that was recommended by staff and was adopted by the hearing examiner very neatly resolves this access issue. It presents a multiple choice approach, gives the opportunity for the applicant to go and obtain either an amended or a new access permit and take access to their property. In conclusion, and hopefully to not restate my misstatement earlier, Commissioner Domke, the county is restricted by federal law from making zoning decisions that quote unquote prohibit or have the effect of prohibiting the provision of personal wireless services. Therefore, there are two ways in which the applicants are entitled to approval of their CUP application. The first is that it complies with all of the conditions and requirements of county code. Then, if it's deemed that it doesn't, then it would be incumbent upon the applicant to go to federal court and prove that the denial materially inhibits the ability of a cell company to provide its wireless services to its customers. And again, the old test, significant gap, plus least intrusive means. The new test is just whether the denial would materially inhibit Verizon's ability to provide personal wireless services. And with that, we would stand for questions.
Does the board have any questions for the applicant at this time?
I don't.
Commissioner, I looked at you.
I know.
Sorry. Because I know I have to turn left first. Commissioner Donkey.
No, I don't have any additional questions at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, at this time, we will move into public comment.
Okay,
Or, no, oh, sorry, I forgot about that. Do you need a break? good. Because you might be wrong. So
I know.
check with him. So that's not-
I'll let you know.
My name is Morgan Hepler with Hepler Law Consulting here in Sandpoint, representing the appellants Christy and Charles Hilbert, who own the property just to the north of the property that is at issue here, which would be the site of the communications tower. My clients are formally opposing the approval of the communications tower CUP 0012-24 for several reasons, but I will be narrowing focus down to just a few here today for commissioners. So thank you, commissioners, for the opportunity to listen to this opposition to the approval of the communications tower. First of all, I'm just going to kind of go over some of the procedural history. So the appellants, Christy and Charles Hilbert, are appealing this conditional use permit. And on January 15th, 2025, the Bonner County Hearing Examiner held a public hearing on the matter. And on the 21st of January, the hearing examiner officially approved the conditional use permit. This appeal basically aims to protect the appellant's rights and uphold the community standards against developments that have not followed code and legal requirements. And this illustration here was sent as an exhibit. It's just, we'll go through it later, but it's kind of what the appellants have demonstrated where the tower would be situated from their living room. And obviously it's not exactly how the tower will look, but it'll be situated in that location there. So this conditional use permit was granted for the construction, as we've mentioned earlier, or has been mentioned earlier, for a 135-foot tall communication tower, just 300 feet from the Hilbert's home. And I want to zoom out a little bit. As we've been looking at maps, this property is pretty rural and is zoned rural 5, as we discussed earlier, but it is the closest town is Old Town. As you all are aware, it is a pretty rural area that has a low population density. And as we saw from the coverage maps, that the applicants have relied upon for their mapping shows that Old Town does have sufficient coverage, which is the closest town to this residence. The decision was made without the applicants first satisfying legal requirements, conditions, and without consideration of how it would impact the local landscape, residential well-being, and property values. So the key arguments in this appeal are as follows. The hearing examiner lacked authority to approve this conditional use permit because the applicant did not satisfy their requirements for access. They did not include an easement that has been recorded, which is a requirement for the conditional use permit for a tower. Neither did they provide any other sort of access, which again is a requirement. The communications towers near the homes are in a rural setting, and having a large tower there will adversely impact property values. Also, the hearing examiner improperly relied upon engineering work that had not been sealed at the time of application approval, as is required by Idaho law. Furthermore, this is inconsistent with the Bonner County Comprehensive Plan which is required for approval of conditional use permit specifically for these towers. So first of all, Bonner County Revised Code Section 12-130A imposes a clear restriction. It states that a conditional use permit may not be approved unless the application fully complies with all provisions of Title 12, which includes Land Use and Development Code. Furthermore, under Title 12, Section 335, there's a requirement that recorded easements for conditional use permits in rural zones, especially specified in Table 3.5, recorded easements must be a part of the application and demonstrated before approval. So in summary, the conditional use permit approval required that there was a recorded easement. So the fact that the approval was conditioned upon obtaining a recorded easement or an additional access permit is not sufficient under the code under 12-130A. So which requires full compliance with all provisions in order to make an approval.
Mr. Hepler,
Yes.
I'm looking at the reference to Bonner County Revised Code 12-130A.
Yes.
And the way I see it reading is the planning director or designee shall have the authority to enforce this title. Planning director shall not issue a permit unless the intended uses of the buildings and land conform in all respects with the provisions of this title.
Yeah.
So I
can go to
think the intent is similar, but I don't believe the actual text that you have up there is the same as the code.
Okay, this is the actual text here. As you quoted it, the planning director designee shall have the authority to enforce this title. The planning director shall not issue a permit unless the intended uses of the buildings and land conform in all respects to the provisions of this title.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. I just want to be sure we're stating it accurately.
Definitely appreciate that, Commissioner. And basically the summary of this is that it cannot be approved unless there is a demonstration that all provisions of the title, which include the requirement for there being access, you can't have it approved until that happens. So that was outside of the authority of the hearing examiner here.
Okay, I can be a little discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. I also just want to go into the effect of the approval here. So as we saw earlier, there were those options for access, and those are all great to contemplate, but none of them are actually recorded. They're options that could happen according to the applicant. The first option is that easement, which is not recorded. And as mentioned earlier, for an approval of a conditional use permit for a cell tower, there must be a recorded easement. So even if the applicant's arguing that there is some sort of unrecorded easement access right, that's irrelevant and speculative. And so because of that, it's really outside of the scope of whether or not option A should even be discussed. Furthermore, that option A was what was included, and it's on the record in the original application. The option to access the tower through the other properties was not included until later on, when it was, the access issues were brought before the planning department. So going back to this, if you see these pictures here, these pictures were taken by the appellant of large, and they've been submitted in more detail with some other pictures as well, but large equipment being basically transported through the quote unquote easement, which is on the appellant's property and was the original requested access. So the effect has been that because of this conditional approval, there's been already, work and large equipment going through the applicant's property to start doing work or inspection, or who knows what they're doing, but it's new large equipment that's going through their property due to this conditional approval for access. Furthermore, as you'll see in the responses from the Idaho Department of Transportation, there hasn't been any access, and we don't know whether the access will be granted or not. So the approval or even conditional approval of this permit is really, it's premature. Also under Bonner County Revised Code 12-226D, a conditional use permit may be revoked on a finding of substantial evidence that a permit is not in compliance with the terms, conditions, or restrictions of the conditional use permit. So there are other options as well, given the fact that there are no points of access that satisfy the requirements, and that the current use of an easement that's not recorded or a speculative easement does not comply with Bonner County's requirements. Let's see here. So I did note that the Bonner County Comprehensive Plan requires that conditional use permits don't impose an undue burden on the neighboring property. And we argue here that the use of heavy equipment going through my client's driveway to access this property is causing an undue burden, especially when it's just a driveway that is just meant for personal small vehicles, not for large equipment coming through it. And when it wasn't part of the approval by that was contemplated by the county. I also wanted to address again, just kind of the context of the coverage here, which is that we're really in a place where there's no easement, the access, there's no easement, and it's in a rural environment, and where we don't have approval or even a comment from the Idaho Department of Transportation saying that this access is something that they could foresee being granted, but it is a little a big question and something that should have been determined before there was any sort of approval of this conditional use permit. Moving on to the property value diminution. So I think just kind of stepping out, again, looking at the context here, we are in a very rural area where, it's heavily forested, low population density, houses are generally far apart from each other. Just kind of looking at the context here, where you have all of a sudden a tower being placed, within a very close distance, less than 300 feet from your house, and arguing that that's not going to in any way devalue the property is a little bit of a leap for me. And I think that it's a stretch to think that, okay, that's not going to devalue a property, especially in the context where it's rural and these are large communication towers, where there's a value for more of a a rural kind of wide expansive environment. And although there is no legal right to a view, that's actually a little kind of beside the point and not something that we were arguing. So I want to kind of push against that. We weren't saying ever that my client has a right to a view, and that because this tower is impeding the view, that it somehow impedes my client's right to a view. We are arguing that it diminishes the value of the property on the market, given the context of being a rural setting and the closeness that it has. It is situated to their house. So under revised code 12-448C, there's a requirement for consideration of any adverse effect the facility would have upon properties in the vicinity. This includes visual, aesthetic, and economic impacts. And this cell tower being built so close to my client's house has an adverse effect on both the economic impacts, visual, aesthetic impacts on their property. So it should be a consideration. It's a requirement to at least be considered when deciding whether to approve of this conditional use permit. Furthermore, the applicant cites federal code and suggests that the county cannot consider property value impacts, but that the provision only prohibits decisions on the basis of the environmental effects of the radio frequency emissions. And the applicant cited a study that only addresses the economic. Okay, actually, I'm going to rewind to this. This goes back to a comment that was stated a little bit earlier, which had to do kind of with, even if everything is satisfied or is by Bonner County, then we could go to federal court. And I think that it's pretty important to note that the county does have a say in whether or not this conditional use permit should be approved. And that, it goes to those exceptions that were granted there are not the only exceptions for what the county can and cannot approve. It goes to a constitutional level as well. And that's the exemption, whether or not a state has authority or the federal government has authority over a decision or a regulation. And here, the Bonner County regulations are not in violation in any way or they haven't been argued to be in violation in any way of any federal codes or any federal standards. So to me, it just feels a little bit like an intimidation tactic to bring in federal law or federal lawsuits or federal vision into this or insight into this. So the real question really comes down to under Bonner County regulations, whether this is something that should be approved or not. Furthermore, I don't believe that, and we'll discuss this a little bit later, that a substantial gap has really been proven. We'll go into it a little bit more about the reliance on the driving tests, but Verizon has not determined, or we haven't seen any proof that Verizon has determined that there is a gap here. As discussed earlier, their maps do not demonstrate that there's a gap. And that was stated a little bit earlier that Verizon has determined that there's some sort of a gap here by the appellants. The studies that were cited by the applicant address the economic benefits of broadband access, not the impact of siting a 135-foot macro tower in direct view of a home. So in the latest response to the notice of appeal that was filed in a public comment by the appellant, they used citations that basically demonstrated how in in rural environments, how access to broadband improves property value. But again, that's not the argument we're making. We're not saying that, you know, of course it does. Of course, having access to broadband improves property value in some way because, you know, having that access is important. We're not diminishing that. But what we're stating is that the property value is diminished by the tower itself, the physical tower next to a home. And none of the studies that have been presented by the applicant have demonstrated that there isn't an impact in a rural setting of a large tower that's near a home or a property. The studies that were cited by the appellants identify broader causes of devaluation, such as visibility, aesthetics, and land use conflict. These are valid considerations under federal law and local code. So even basically, I kind of come against the argument that, you know, citing all of these peer-reviewed studies is somehow not demonstrating the impact, because a lot of, even though some of them were international, one was in Australia, if you go into the details of the studies, they're saying this has an international application about how cell towers affect property values in a rural setting, which is what we're questioning here. The applicants' studies are more in actual towns where there's large populations, and they're not large towers like the one that we're contemplating here. And you know, I have like a economics background as well, and these were rigorous studies that used hedonic, you know, approaches where they were using complex mathematics, and it was peer reviewed, and that does hold weight, and that holds much more weight than an email citation to an Ada County assessor in one of the counties that has some of the largest populations in the entire state of Idaho, and is not, you know, related to Bonner County. Furthermore, that's just an email, and it's not sworn under oath for one thing, and it's not a study. So that's their only quote unquote on point piece of evidence, is some email quotation from an assessor in a county far away from here. One cited study, which is consistent with global methodology, addresses in spatial hedonic modeling of visual and proximity, addresses the relevant question of whether tower siting imposes adverse impacts in a rural residential context, and not whether connectivity adds value in urban settings like the applicant studies address. And this was also addressed in starting from January 8th, before the decision was made by the hearing examiner, in a public comment that I had submitted about the property value diminution of these cell towers next to residential places homes and residences. And I did not see any sort of analysis within any of the decisions that were made by the Department of Planning, which is, as I'll discuss a bit later, is, you know, it should be addressed and at least analyzed in this decision, because it's part of the comprehensive plan's goals to not diminish property values in the county. I also wanted to bring up really quickly some of the property value arguments that I had made earlier. Well, I just kind of wanted to discuss how the applicant did not address any of the basically refutations that were made in the latest public comment about property value studies. I think that their citation to a bunch of studies that show that access to broadband creates more property value. And then there's studies that demonstrate from a very biased source that there is any sort of property value. There is not a property value diminution from these cell towers. Doesn't really refute any of the arguments that we made and all of the peer-reviewed citations that we've made that demonstrate that there is a diminution in value, along with just the I hate to say it, but common sense that having a tower like this next to a home in the setting that we're discussing here, which is a rural setting surrounded by forests, where the closest town is Old Town, like that's not going to diminish the value of that home, is kind of a hard argument for me to make, to swallow. And I hope it is for the commissioners as well here, because there hasn't even been any substantial evidence to make an argument that it doesn't diminish the value. The next thing is the use of uncertified engineering work and permits decisions violates Idaho code. The hearing examiner improperly relied upon engineering work that had not been sealed at the time of the application approval. The applicant asserts that drive tests do not constitute engineering work and therefore do not need to be sealed by a licensed engineer. However, let's go over what Idaho code says. And under Idaho code section 54-1215, it prohibits the public use of unlicensed engineering work in connection with permitting where such work, quote unquote, professional services or creative work requiring engineering, education, training, and experience. The RF signal mapping and propagation modeling, particularly when used to justify site selection in the land use proceeding, falls squarely within this scope. At the time the conditional use permit was approved on January 21st, the applicant's drive test had not been certified or sealed by a licensed professional engineer, and the seal was not affixed until March 21st, 2 months after the hearing examiner's decision, and it did not include a date stamp as required under Idaho law. The applicant's argument that no reliability or challenge was raised misses the point. This is a legal objection under Idaho's engineering licensure laws. Use of uncertified engineering work in a permitting decision undermines the integrity of the process and violates public protection purposes of Idaho Code 54-1215. So the Idaho Code 54-1215 mandates that any engineering work influencing public decisions affecting property, public safety, or infrastructure planning must be certified by a licensed professional engineer. That's what this comes down to. The engineering work which influenced the public decision by the Department of Planning was not certified by a professional engineer. It's as plain as that.
Mr. Heflin,
Yes.
could you point to what section of 54-1215 you're referring to?
Yeah, I don't have the text in front of me, but I could pull it up if I have permission.
I'd appreciate it. I'm trying to be fair and consistent. Anytime I see a reference, I like to be able to read it and confirm that what's being inferred is consistent with the reference.
Yes, I appreciate that.
And we have, subsections 1, 2, 3, and 4, under that title chapters. These 54-1215 specifically referring to the state board issuing licenses and then how the license is sealed to be used.
So sorry, I'm kind of trying to track back because yeah, any such document presented to a client or public or governmental agency that is not final and does not fix institutes.
I think when you go through that chapter, it doesn't support the comment that says prohibits the public use of unlicensed engineering work in connection with permitting. When you, so maybe
Sure.
you're meaning 54-1202-10, because this just talks about the seal and how you are certified or licensed.
I think you're right, Commissioner, that it's referencing the Idaho Code 54-1215 is really going over the definitions here, right? For the for the engineering seals. And then the requirement is under 54-1202-10. So it's more about that's defining it, and then the requirement is under the other provision. But apologies for the confusion there.
I don't see it in subsections.
It's not in 10 either.
Okay.
So I think your summary of those.
Yeah, I think it might have been summarizing correctly. Is it okay if I before the end of this hearing kind of go back and provide a correction or a summary of this that's more on point?
Sure.
But in the end, I think that a lot of this was put together probably from the one sheeter that I did submitted previously, which was going back to the history, was kind of submitted in a rush due to the responses that were made like the same day of the hearing, of the last scheduled hearing. So that might be where that is coming from there. But I know that through the laws that there is the requirement, if there is engineering work that is being relied upon from a decision within public place here, then it needs to be licensed by an engineer. And I can provide that to you before the end of this hearing.
Thank you. I see it now. It's 54-1202 subsection 11.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. And apologies for that miscitation. On that point, I didn't really think it was necessary to bring it up, but before the last hearing that was scheduled, the day before the hearing, we did receive about 53 pages of a response from the applicant. And that's where some of this, I think, is coming from, is that there was a rush to provide responses legally to those arguments. And that's kind of overflowing into this. And there was a little bit of a prejudice, I believe, but it was cured in a lot of ways by rescheduling the hearing. but by a lot of those rushed kinds of arguments that were being made back, which we reviewed most of them, and everything was nothing was, you know, overly prejudicial, but it was created some of these rushes that came in response. So moving forward from the engineering license, I wanted to discuss the consistency or lack of consistency with the Bonner County Comprehensive Plan. And the applicant incorrectly asserts that the comprehensive plan is non-binding here and cannot serve as a basis to deny this conditional use permit. So the applicant did bring up the case here, Eurisha versus Blaine County, where the Supreme Court held that a subdivision application, so this was regarding a subdivision application, could not be denied solely for failing to conform with the comprehensive plan when it otherwise complied with all applicable zoning and subdivision ordinances. So this is different because this is a conditional use permit governed by Idaho Code 67-6512, which requires that such decisions be made in accordance with the adopted plan. So that was not applicable to the subdivision application in the case the applicant cites. Here, there actually is a requirement that decisions are made in accordance with the comprehensive plan. Furthermore, Bonner County Revised Code Section 12-488C further directs the decision maker to uphold the purpose and intent of the title and the comprehensive plan. Because conditional use permits are not permitted by rights, and I know that applicant said that there have been other conditional use permits that have cited this provision. In the end, the code is going to be what's controlling here, not the general principles that are in common law about whether or not the comprehensive plan should be controlling. Here, there has been a requirement that the comprehensive plan be considered when deciding whether or not to allow a conditional use permit like this one. I want to make sure I address everything else that I had noted earlier. Regarding I kind of wanted to go back a little bit to the what had been stated a little bit earlier by the engineering reports. Again, it was not certified by an engineer here in Idaho, and therefore I argue that any of those analyses and drive tests and coverage reports should not be relied upon. Rather, the Verizon coverage should be relied upon here, which demonstrates that there is enough 5G within the property at issue. Furthermore, the argument that the requirement that all people have coverage to 5G is not a requirement either, and that's not reasonable. You know, it's a heavily forested area where having outdoor coverage is kind of a luxury, I would say, in a lot of areas within this county, especially with such a low population density. And I haven't seen any proof that there is an explosion in population in this general vicinity that we're talking about here. Again, I mean, I'd like to repeat what the community here is saying. How is there a need? Don't rely on the drive test, rely on Verizon's maps. The disclaimers that have been cited. I don't see anything in them that disqualifies the accuracy of the maps at all, especially when there's such a high, you know, like why would they haven't shown, Verizon hasn't shown the need when they're showing on their tests that there is 5G saturation within that area. Regarding the alternative sites, all that's been demonstrated is that the willing participants would have a bit less coverage, but not that it would be taking away the opportunity to give coverage in the area. Furthermore, what evidence has there been of due diligence and efforts to contact as many people as possible for alternative sites in the area? That is lacking. I think that we should have the opportunity to see what efforts went into the alternative site investigation instead of relying solely on the fact that, or the statement that nobody was willing except for a couple of people, and even the willing participants have coverage available from their sites. And that should be considered here because in the end, it would be preserving the rural character under the comprehensive plan, and by not putting it in a place that's, you know, right next to a home, preserving the property values and considering the community here and what the community wants. So in conclusion, you know, the applicant's failure to acquire legal access is a pretty big issue here, and it should have been there should not have been an approval of the conditional use permit until that access was actually afforded, recorded, and something that was part of the application. Potential reductions in property value and the preservation of the rural area matters and should be considered because the comprehensive plan has made them main goals for this county. Reliance on engineering work that had not been sealed at the time of this application's approval is also fatal to the application. And just in general, the inconsistency with the comprehensive plan's goals are also legally significant because it is a condition of approval. Furthermore, they weren't really outlined, including the property value assessment and whether it would impact property values within the decision that was made by the Department of Planning. So for this reason, we formally request commissioners in the county to revoke this permit. My clients formally request that the Bonner County Commissioners reconsider the approval of CUP 0012-24. And this is to maintain community standards and adherence to local code and legal requirements, and to protect property investments for long-term benefit of the area. I don't believe that there is a need to rush the application, but to fully consider whether all conditions, all requirements have been met, and whether the Bonner County Comprehensive Plan is being, the goals are being fulfilled here. And I believe that these 3 points, these main points are enough to invalidate and to revoke the approval of the conditional use permit. Again, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Does the board have any questions for me?
Nope. Thanks.
You're gonna put that sign up. Or we public comment now? Is there anybody online?
believe we have a couple of people online, Commissioner.
Okay. All right, so at this time, we are going to have public comment. We'll start with public comment that is in support of the project, then neutral, then testimony in opposition. Then we will have applicant rebuttal. There'll be no further public comment allowed after the rebuttal, and then the board will deliberate on the issue. So with that, do we have anybody that is in support of the project that wants to give a comment? Make sure you state your name and county of residence, please.
Robert Custer, Bottle County. Going back to the picture that they showed of their view of the tower, that is grossly overscaled as far as where the location is actually more to the west, more behind the their building of the shop. And first of all, it's not really painted bright orange. And it's not showing basically the distance of how far it is away. They've got that place basically at the corner of their shop, or put it towards the back of their shop, 200 some, or approximately 200 feet, 189 feet away, back in the tree line. And then the scale of the picture where they have the tower rated about 5 inches above the tree line, it's only really about 2 inches above the tree line. On that scale. So,
Thank you.
we purposely put that tower back behind the shop because it would be directly in their roof where they originally wanted to be put it, would have been basically straight in front of them. But I said, no, I was being considerate. For one, I didn't want to look out. When I look out my front door, when I still look at my front door, I can still see it, but I still got it coming. I also want to state they have a 355-degree radius. That would do not see it. It's not just directly right in front of them. They can turn it 5 degrees and you can see it. And the picture, I want to say, basically pointed up towards the sky. As you can see that tree line there, there's no other view other than their shop. That goes all the way down to the ground, but you wouldn't see the tower going on the ground.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else in support of the project that wants to give a comment? Anybody online?
No,
Okay.
they haven't.
All right, we'll move to neutral. Anybody neutral wants to give a comment? Anybody online? All right, in opposition. Is there anybody in opposition of the project that wants to give a comment?
My name is Christy Hilbert and I own the property to the north. Based off of their plat map, they have 277 feet from the back property line, the west property line to where the tower is. The back of my 40 by 50 shop, so that from the aerial picture is the exact, almost the exact same size as their cell-formed base. It's 260 feet from the back of the property line. So their tower will actually be 277 feet according to their plat map, which puts it actually coming forward from my shop. And the trees out there are 70 feet high. We just had 2 of them removed from our backyard. So 130-foot tower is not going to be just 2 inches above the tree line. And yeah, I think that's. I just wanted to point that out because yeah, the back of the shop is 260 feet, so that tower will be actually forward from it.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Can I read?
No. Anyone else in opposition of the project that wants to give a comment?
There's one online.
All right, let's go to online. I can't see.
Mr. Bowman.
Mr. Bowman, go ahead.
Good afternoon. Dave Bowman, Bonner County. I just want to point out a couple of I don't know, inconsistencies, I guess, from the applicant. Uh, the study on property values or multiple studies, first of all, saying that studies really don't matter, and then quoting other studies to support the point. But all these studies of urban areas, Boston, Phoenix, I forget what all, but all of them were high density urban areas. And so to use those, and then a statement from some official in Ada County from 7 years ago really don't do anything to support that this does not detract in property values. And then just the appellant's attorney already said this, but I want to just confirm it that the applicant also said that the comprehensive plan is not a metric by which to judge this. It is the code, and only that the comp plan informs the code. But the code 12223 says you have to will neither create a hazard or be dangerous to property. Must not be in conflict with the policies of the comprehensive plan. So I would remind that attorney, just look at that code a little bit closer. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else online? All right. Okay, so we will close public comment at this time, and then we go to the appellant.
Maybe we should do applicant rebuttal and then appellant rebuttal.
Okay, so applicant rebuttal and then appellant rebuttal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the commission. We've been here a long time. I'll be very brief. The first thing I'd like to note is that the code section that requires a written easement is very specific. It's the subsection 3 or the note 3 on the use table. And what that says is that for properties that take access via a road, I know it sounds silly, but a road and a street are different things. And especially when you look at the definitions of those items in county code. So I looked at the definition of road. And if you look at it under R, it says see subsection B, local roads of definition of streets. So I go to streets. It says there, a public or recorded easement or right of way which affords access to adjoining property and connects local access roads with routes of higher classification. Based on the first option, the one that talks about the road that runs to the north, that would require a public easement correctly, because that is taking access via a road. Options B and C, or options 2 and 3, excuse me, are not taking access via a road. Those are taking access from a state highway, which is a separate defined term from road. A state highway is a public highway, not a road. And thus wouldn't need to prove an easement to take access from the state highway. I point that out because only option 1 of the 3 would we need to show a written easement, not options 2 or 3. As far as other arguments were made, I think that counsel for the opponents essentially repeated what was in his written materials, which we've already responded to in writing. So I won't take up a lot of your time responding to that. I would note that under the comprehensive plan, counsel for the opponents kept saying that we need to comply with the comprehensive plan. That's not what the code says, and that's not the argument that we were trying to make, is that it says we shall not be in conflict with. And under case law in the state of Idaho, there's a legal difference between complies with and not in conflict with. And not in conflict with means that so long as we meet the requirements of the zoning code, which is the legally operative code, that we can just comply generally with the comprehensive plan. As found by the staff report, as well as the hearing examiner, we do comply both generally and specifically with the comprehensive plan. As far as property values, there's been nothing before the board today to show how property values affect adjacent property. As I said in my earlier remarks, citations to studies without anything more are not substantial evidence. And as pointed out in my conversation with you about the federal law, you can only deny a cell tower based on substantial evidence. It can't be But it can't be just citations to studies. It has to be actual evidence. And there's none of that in this case. The opponents had the opportunity to provide direct evidence of property values and the effect on property values. In other cases that I've handled, what they'll do sometimes is get an appraiser to do a use case, and the use case is a before and after. In about half of those cases that I've handled, the appraiser is unable to find the difference between the two. In the other half, when they do find a difference, it's slight. It's usually between 1% and 3%. In this case, there is no such evidence, no such direct evidence of an impact to property values that's been presented by the opponents. And in their appeal, it's incumbent upon them to provide evidence of the effect before we have to respond to there being an effect. As far as the substantial gap, it's actually a significant gap in coverage, not called a substantial gap. It's a significant gap in coverage. And in this case, the only evidence in the record before the board is that the significant gap exists. And to go back to Madam Chair's question about, and to Commissioner Domke's question about what is acceptable service. The acceptable service is providing an uninterrupted call experience to users of the phone. When I was a kid, it probably was acceptable. I don't know if you remember back when cell phones were bricks, and you had to go outside on, I had to go outside on my parents' deck to use my dad's cell phone if I wanted to use his cell phone because it wouldn't make it through the building. That was an acceptable level of coverage back then. Today, where most people use their cell phones inside buildings, in order to have a successful uninterrupted call within a building, you need to have that in-building level of service. And that's what we're looking for here, is be able to provide an in-building and in-vehicle level of service to Verizon and eventually AT&T and T-Mobile users in this area. We'd obviously be willing to stand for any questions you have, but that's going to conclude my rebuttal. But we would be happy to answer any questions from the board.
Does the board have any questions at this time? Yeah. All right.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, so then we'll go to the appellant.
Firstly, regarding this road versus street kinds of splitting hairs of words that are literally it doesn't make sense, actually. I'm sorry. Here, the first option was the one that would require an easement, which is the one that I was talking about in the first place. Options B and C are going through the property owners, at issue through his property. Why would you need an easement for that? No, what's required is either an easement or proof of access. There's no proof of access through that property by Idaho Department of Transportation. And this email is actually on the record from January 22nd from the Idaho Department of Transportation, stated from Kimberly Hobson. She stated the property owner at CUP 0012-24 dropped off paperwork to our district that had a new approach onto the highway proposed. ITD permits would like to comment that no additional new approaches will meet spacing and will not be granted. I mean, so I'm sorry, but splitting like the road, street distinction and trying to bring up a requirement for an easement doesn't really make any sense. No, there is no access, and there's no access that's going to meet the requirements under Idaho law. That's it, period. And there's no evidence that there ever will be. And then the next one is another splitting of hairs, improperly splitting of hairs over the word comply with the comprehensive plan. Yeah, I think that, again, that's kind of misleading in the way that he was saying that, if it, as long as it doesn't conflict with it or something like that, I don't know. He was trying to kind of go through an analysis that sidesteps the comprehensive plan and the need to analyze whether it complies with the comprehensive plan. But it is within the Idaho code, as I mentioned earlier, how we had the person who joined over the phone call. So this conditional use permit is governed by Idaho Code 67-6512, which requires that such decisions be made in accordance with the adopted plan. So if we're splitting words, it's in accordance. And 12-488C further directs the decision maker to uphold the purpose and intent of the title and the comprehensive plan. So upholding and in accordance, those are the real words. And just kind of, if I did say anything that was more strict than that, then apologies, but I still do think it is a high standard. And it does mean that the comprehensive plan does need to be considered, which includes the protection of property values and the preservation of the rural character of the properties. Next, going to the statement that we have not provided proof of property value diminution. How has it not been proven here when there are peer-reviewed citations stating as such? That is proof. They are peer-reviewed. They used the highest scientific and economic methodologies. They are widely accepted papers. They are not biased. They actually address the issue here, which is cell towers in rural areas affecting the property value of homes. None of his studies, which are his proof, demonstrate anything that's actually related to the current situation. When you're talking about urban settings and where there aren't even tall towers, I'm sorry, it's not related. And saying that we didn't offer proof is really hard for me to, it's hard to even take that at face value when the only proof that they offered was citation to biased materials that were not related and engineering that was not sealed correctly for a decision to be made and relied upon. That was their evidence. This acceptable service standard that the applicant is trying to have you believe in, where is this standard coming from? I don't know how they're coming up with this standard and kind of going back to the time when we had block telephones, etc. This is just anecdotal, and it's not a real legal standard. Here we have the only evidence that the county should rely upon is Verizon's maps, which show that there is coverage there. The other evidence that's been presented of coverage in the area should not be relied upon because it wasn't sealed correctly by an engineer in Idaho. For that reason, there's not even evidence of a gap that can be relied upon in this situation. Thank you again for your time and your consideration.
Thank you.
It is 2:13 and we're going to take a break. We'll resume at how about how long? Okay, 2:20. All right, thank you. Okay. All right, it is 2:23 and we're coming back from a recess and we'll enter into deliberations with the board. So we'll start with Commissioner Corn.
Really a hard case. I see both sides to this. But I'm having some issues on a few of the things. I'm seeing an issue on ingress and egress to the site. That seems like it could end up being a legal issue. I'm not totally sold that there is a lack of coverage in the area. In fact, reading some of the emails from some of the very nearby neighbors saying that they have cell service inside their house. I don't know. I'm not going to call them a liar, but I see I see a few things. The other one I have an issue with is I do believe the CUP would diminish the property values in the area. For any of us that live in rural areas, I know that I personally would not buy a property or a house that was next door to a cell tower or anything else that makes my rural environment look different. I'm used to seeing pine trees and stuff like that, but I'm not used to seeing man-made objects such as a cell tower. And it's not limited to cell towers, but anything like that that's going to pop out and have to look at all the time. I got an issue with the studies that were done that I picked up on that as soon as they were talking about it, that the studies that were shown for the appellant side is all in urban areas. And I think that I pretty much know that people that live in urban areas are different minded than people that live in rural areas. We have different likes. That's why some of us choose to live on a mountaintop and others choose to live in the middle of the city. The people that live in the city like to have all of these conveniences and stuff, and they don't mind possibly looking at things. And as it was stated, I haven't paid a lot of attention to cell towers in cities, but I have seen a few, and I haven't seen the towers, but I do see things attached to buildings and things like that, because most of the time the cities are pretty flat, and we are blessed with these mountains that block radio frequencies and everything else. So I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around those issues. And I'm going to kind of refer to you guys on a couple of things, such as, does this CUP go against our comp plan and certain things like that. So those are my issues right now, preliminary, off the top of my head.
Okay. Commissioner Donahue.
Commissioner Corn, to what you just stated, I concur that, so starting with our land use policies, policy 2 indicates that commercial and industrial uses may be conditionally permitted in areas not identified for such uses in the comprehensive plan if a critical review of the proposed use determines that the appropriate conditions the use will not adversely impact the surrounding area. To the points that you raised, I agree that having a 135-foot tower in the middle of a rural area, I find to be in conflict with the rural character. Regardless of the fact that our code talks about color, painting in appropriate color, it doesn't remove the fact that we have an obstruction in the landscape. I do find that the applicant's reference to studies that are very specific to urban areas, with the focus being on the improved value or lack of change in value to those users, don't think accounts for the rural conditions as you were describing. So I agree with you there. The study that the appellant referenced, I reviewed in some detail, and I believe the methodology they use is far more in keeping with the issues that are being addressed. In its appeal, it indicates that for properties that are within a proximity of 0.72 kilometers or less, or So that this property be well within that distance, that would be a little over 2,600 feet. I did have to do the calculation, I don't know off the top of my head, but that it's showing that the difference between if a tower is visible or not. And so even if it's not, if it's within that close of a proximity, it's showing a fact that depreciates or decreases the value. But if it is visible, it's indicating a negative price impact of up to 9.78%. So to me, that's a significant finding, and something that I consider to be concerning when I then look at the second part of the comprehensive plan that I think is applicable, which is community design, where it says the policy number one is to promote and preserve the natural features and rural atmosphere of the community and should enact development standards to address development. The scenic byways and design standards that account for waterfront setbacks, wildlife corridors, commercial and industrial landscaping, requirements for reduced lighting and cluster development, rural rather than urban setback standards, and other design objectives aimed at preserving the rural natural character of the community. So, again, I don't believe having a 145-foot cell tower in the middle of a rural residential area is in compliance with the natural features and rural atmosphere of that area. I too have some concerns over the data that was presented through the gap. As I was asking questions during the presentation, to me, there appears to be a lack of correlation between the drive test findings, what the engineer search area is, what the stated need for improvement for coverage is, and then the actual locations that were considered, as well as the alternatives. I didn't hear conclusive and convincing evidence that other areas had been seriously and substantially considered other sites that may have had reduced impacts based on visibility. As I mentioned earlier, just looking at the topo maps and what the terrain is like in some of the other areas adjacent, it doesn't add up to me from a common sense filter. So as I'm looking through this, the other pieces for me, as you mentioned, the access side, we have the ITD letter. And to confirm, I had looked up the ITD's encroachment standards onto state highways. And the shortest encroachment standard I can find for a rural area is 500 feet. And the distance between the two existing driveways to the property to the north and the property to the south is just over 400 feet. So I understand why ITD is saying you can't meet the criteria. So then it seems that the only opportunity is to get some type of an easement for access to one of the other properties, which is not currently in place. And then I also have the safety concern that don't have the FAA no hazard determination. I'm not personally comfortable with saying that that's something that could be provided as a future condition before the issuance of the permit. It's a safety issue. And to me, that safety issue should be addressed now, associated with the approval, not in a future date. So because of those reasons, I don't think that we have alignment with the comprehensive plan, and the lack of the legal access, as well as the impacts to the rural setting and the FAA no hazard determination not being provided, tells me that we don't have compliance with Title 12. And when I think about the lack of the FAA no hazard designation and not knowing if we have safe and legal site access, I don't see how we can say that there isn't any hazard potential. So I'm not seeing an opportunity for a path to say it's okay to allow the employees to stay, and I believe we should reverse the decision.
So when I looked at this and listening to the presentation, and I'm not gonna go over what you guys did, I'm gonna hit it from a different level. I found the data presented to be very one-sided. The data, when you pull up the Boston, Dallas, Phoenix, and Raleigh, North Carolina, the information is from scientists for wired technology. So it's not an objective data, and it's also very specific to cities. When we're talking about valuation, when the comment is made that the cell tower can increase the value, the actual study is that the properties that have increased value are commercial properties, not residential properties. The comment that Commissioner Donkey made about the decrease in value in that 9% is what you're seeing that happens on residential properties. And those are studies that came out of HUD housing. The other issue that I have and I want to talk about is the comment about being materially inhibited for Verizon. I find it interesting that I'm supposed to ignore the map that Verizon gives me about their coverage, but accept the data that Verizon gives me that says they need another one. But it's the same group and the same methodology. And so for me, when I live in Blanchard, so I drive through this. My call does not drop here. And when I look at the saturation of the market, it comes to the question of, is there a need that justifies that? And I don't see that there's a coverage gap in that area. There are studies, and Verizon, and I want to pull up Verizon specifically, we're saying Verizon isn't good at doing their job to justify this, yet Verizon's argument is that they are 95% of their Metro Drive tests, and this is updated. They test the reliability of their service, and they use their test to make that map by which the consumer is supposed to be able to say, which one do I want to go with? That's just one provider, and it's the provider that's asking for it. In that area, there is other service providers as well. And so the argument that says Verizon is materially inhibited, I don't buy that, because the Verizon map actually shows they have the highest level of coverage, and they're calling that 5G ultra wideband in the area that you're talking about. And so I don't see that the argument of material inhibited would work in this area. I think that the presentation didn't focus on the impacts to residential, and as a board, I would say that the conditions of the CUP that approved it, I agree, don't work. And I believe that it should be reversed. I don't see that the data shows that there's a need, and I don't see that there was a presentation that showed that you would be materially inhibited in this particular area. And I would say that the data from Verizon itself reflects that it actually has very good coverage in this particular area. We are, I agree that it's not in line with the comprehensive plan, and that when you look at 12.2.23, it requires that we say we're not in that conflict. And I have to find the need, and I have to balance that with the property. Nobody has a click down menu that says, I want to live next to a cell tower. And so when you look at that, there's no way that I could say that a property next to that in a residential area is not negatively impacted. That you can't compare a cell tower in a commercial area to in a residential area. And to me, I think that the presentation, especially saying because Verizon has a disclaimer on their website, which everybody has a disclaimer, means that they didn't know what they were doing when they made this map, but they did know what they were doing to say they needed the cell tower. It just is, it doesn't work for me to say that. I think Verizon does do a good job of coverage. I have Verizon, and this map, I think, is an accurate reflection of the saturation of the highest cell availability in that area. I don't agree with the argument that was made by council that said the obligatory option of you're owed that, because in this particular case, when you're looking at yes, I have difficulty pronouncing that word. People don't expect to see that cell tower. They expect to be able to have the nature aspect of it, and changing that, I don't see the argument there. Were you raising your hand, please? Oh. Like, shut up, Adrian. So I mean, that's where I think that when I looked at, and that's not, doesn't even, the number of people that had comments, and I don't I received a comment specifically from a person who was on a commission related to cell towers, and they did a very good detailed response. It's actually that one right there. Regarding the proximity of the cell tower, and I just don't see that this was an appropriate conditional use permit. I don't see that data was presented to support it, and I agree with the comments made by the other commissioners of the egress and the conditions, and that those things would have, if you were going to move in that direction, they needed to have been there when it was approved. But at this time, I also don't see that there was really addressing the actual need. So that I support the idea of not allowing the conditional use permit.
I'm prepared to make a motion if the commissioners would like.
Okay, at this time, we'll accept a motion.
I move to reverse the hearing examiner's decision on the United project file CUP 0012-24, a conditional use permit for communications tower, based upon the following conclusions. Conclusion 1, the proposed conditional use permit is in conflict with the policies of the Bonner County Comprehensive Plan. Conclusion 2, this proposal was reviewed for compliance with the criteria and standards set forth at Bonner County Revised Code Title 12, Chapter 2, Subchapter 2.2, Conditional Use Permits, Chapter 4, Development Standards, and Chapter 7, Environmental Standards. The proposal is not in accord with the Bonner County Revised Code. Conclusion 3, the proposed use will create a hazard or will be dangerous to persons on or adjacent to the property. I want to state that that is in relationship to the lack of a encroachment permit for legal and or safe access for ITD, as well as the lack of a mitigating hazard designation. The decision is based upon the evidence submitted up to the time the staff report was prepared and testimony received at this hearing. I further move to adopt the findings of fact as set forth in the staff report or as amended during this hearing, and direct planning staff to draft written findings and conclusions to reflect this decision and transmit to all interested parties. This action does not result in taking of private property. The action that could be taken, if any, to obtain the conditional use permit is to 1, file a new application with the planning department and meet the standards required by the Bonner County Revised Code. 2, pursue such remedies as may be applicable at Title 67, Chapter 65, Item 3.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion by the board?
None.
Hearing none, roll call vote.
Commissioner Gottlieb,
Yes.
Commissioner Williams,
Yes.
Chair Horn,
Yes.